Here's Davey. Here are 19 reasons to watch Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Dave Musson, at Dave Musson on Instagram. This is a place where I talk to you about Stephen King. I've covered all of his books and now I'm talking about movies and adaptations. And in this video, I'm going to give you 19 reasons to watch the 1980 adaptation of his novel, The Shining. So do stick around for that. But first, a couple of things to plug. Okay, you know the drill now. If you hit the link up there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, which means you get my mini collection, Mirrored plus 10 Tiny Tales of Terror, for free as an ebook just for signing up. And you'll get a weekly email from me, a short story, and an indie horror author for you to check out. If you like checking out new indie horror authors, then you've got to give Constant Writers, my spin-off podcast / series, a listen or a watch. You can watch the episodes here on this YouTube channel, or you can check them out in audio form wherever you get your podcasts from. And they are me talking to an indie horror author each time about their work, their love of writing, and of course, their love of Stephen King. So do check that out. And lastly, do pick up your copy of the Ultimate Stephen King Quiz Book, which I wrote last year. Well, spent 2 years writing it, published it last year. It's really fun. More than 3,000 questions on all of things Stephen King. And if you've already picked up a copy, thank you so much. If you're able to leave a rating and review on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads, I'd really, really appreciate it. All the links are in the description below. Okay, as you know from the title of this video and from what I've already said, we're up to 1980 and Stanley Kubrick's version of The Shining, based on the 1977 novel of the same name, and undoubtedly one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. I feel like I've said iconic horror movies of all time quite a lot since we started this little trip, 3 weeks ago. But this early run of King movies, like the early run of books, is exactly that, iconic. Anyway, let's do 19 reasons to read The Shining. Tony, we're watching it, we're not reading it. Okay, let's go. Okay, let's start with the big one. This adaptation is famous, infamous among constant readers because, well, King doesn't like it. Mainly because Jack Torrance is clearly insane from the start and Wendy Torrance is quickly reduced to this shrieking mess, which does both characters a huge disservice from how they are in the book. Now, because of the fact that King disliked it enough to go and make his own mini-series of it in 1997, it's definitely worth checking out if you read and enjoyed the book because, well, you need to see it to form your own judgment. For me, as a masterclass of visual cinema horror, The Shining is one of the best that's ever been made. As an adaptation of a Stephen King novel, well, less so. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, this movie looks spectacular and just sucks you in. A lot of this is thanks to the plentiful use of Steadicam, which was fairly new technology at the time, but it makes you feel like you are quite literally walking those corridors of the Overlook, and it is utterly compelling. So the legend of how Kubrick decided he wanted to adapt this is quite a fun one, even if King himself doesn't necessarily believe it. Now, the story goes that when Kubrick would be deciding what book to adapt next, he'd read the book until he got bored and then he'd chuck it at his wall, and his secretary would hear the accompanying thud on the wall and think, okay, another one bites the dust. Anyway, he picks up The Shining, he starts reading The Shining, and the thud never came. He found his book. So Kubrick was infamously a perfectionist and required retake upon retake upon retake, and such high standards that with this one, it literally drove some of the cast to tears. Apparently, the scene with Wendy swinging the bat was shot more than 120 times and even extended to the poster. The poor poster designer had to make 300 versions before Kubrick was pleased. Now, that might sound funny on the outset, but it was actually pretty damaging. Shelley Duvall, who played Wendy, was basically bullied throughout this movie and suffered huge mental health problems because of it and had hair loss and was basically a nervous wreck. And Scatman Crothers, who plays Dick Halloran, likewise was literally driven to tears, and when working on his next film, when he realised he didn't have to do those retakes all the time, he actually cried tears of happiness and relief. I mean, given that, those two, their performances are even more impressive. That's a nice segue into the cast, and we've got to start with Jack Nicholson, who gives a career-defining performance as the utterly unhinged and terrifying Jack Torrance. He is fantastic throughout, and apparently he sort of helped get himself into character by insisting that he only be fed cheese sandwiches for 2 weeks. Why cheese sandwiches? Because he hates cheese sandwiches. And also the constant rewrites from Kubrick probably didn't help his own mental state either. But his performance, it's pretty exceptional.
Wendy, listen. Let me out of here and I'll forget the whole goddamn thing. It'll be just like nothing ever happened.
I've already mentioned Shelley Duvall as Wendy, and again, she is absolutely fantastic, but it ruined her, so was it worth it?
Oh, come on, hon. Don't be so grouchy.
And Scatman Crothers as Dick Halloran, he's brilliant. I love him in this role. He was a great suggestion by Jack Nicholson to play this role, and every scene he's in is a joy. Now, I've not yet mentioned Danny Lloyd, who plays Danny Torrance in this. Now, the crew were very careful to keep from him the fact that this was a horror film. They basically pitched it as a drama to him, and they kept him out of any of the really, really traumatic scenes. And in fact, he didn't see the final cut of this for another 11 years after he filmed it. He also has excellent knitwear throughout, which I'm pretty jealous of. So lastly, before spoilers, I would bet that if you've never seen this before and you come around to watching this, you will discover a bunch of scenes in here that you actually are already aware of just because they are so embedded in popular culture. I certainly found that the first time I watched this film. As for whether it's a good adaptation of a King novel, well, it probably isn't the best way you could have treated this novel, but as a masterclass of horror, yeah, it's difficult to fault. It's full of dread, tension, unease, and a bunch of what the fuck? Okay, I'm about to go into things like how this differs from the book, my favourite scenes, favourite lines, Easter eggs and that. So if you don't want any of those revealed to you at this point, consider this your spoiler alert and consider this your invitation to leave if you need to. But if you don't need to, stick around because I've got a few more reasons for you to watch The Shining. So when it comes to differences between the movie and the book, there are quite a lot. One of the most obvious is the iconic room in the Overlook Hotel. 217 in the book, which of course 17 plus 2 is 19. 237 in the movie.
You're scared of room 237, ain't you?
No, I ain't.
And it's a very handy way of allowing you to spot whether someone is more of a reader or a watcher. One of my favourite scenes from the book, the hedge animals, didn't make the cut in this movie. Kubrick wasn't convinced that the effects would be worth it. And that's a shame, but actually, when you fast forward to the 1997 miniseries, he was probably onto something. So the ending is also wildly different. Halloran is murdered in the film, and the hotel is not burned to the ground in Jack Torrance's final heroic act where he saves everyone. Again, it kind of does a disservice to that character, and it sort of backs up a lot of this film's critics who say this is a cold film. I mean, it ends with Jack Torrance literally frozen to death. Don't get much colder than that.
Yeah, that's all it is.
But in fact, it doesn't quite end there. We've got to mention the actual ending. That slow pan out of the 4th of July 1921 special ball photo that has Jack Torrance front and centre. He's become part of the hotel's history. Now, there are literally thousands and thousands of things out there examining what the fuck this scene might mean. I'm not going to go into it now. For me, it's weird, but in the context of the movie, it works. Okay, time for some of my favourite scenes. I'm going to start with Jack Nicholson getting to do the Kubrick stare. Unsettling. Next, it's probably a tie for me between the blood from the elevators or the creepy twins, neither of whom are in the book and are another way of allowing you to spot whether someone is primarily a constant reader or a constant watcher. And of course there is no judgment on either of those. It's just, a way of telling. However, when it comes to favourite scenes, the winner for me is a basic one, but it's the axe through the door. And it's got everything. It's scary, it's explosive, it's really claustrophobic and unsettling. And there's some interesting history behind it. So the crew making the door for Jack Nicholson to put the axe through deliberately made it quite easy to destroy for the purpose of the film. However, they underestimated Nicholson, who used to be a firefighter, and he didn't just destroy it, he obliterated it with absolute ease. So they had to then go and make stronger doors. So it did require a bit of work for him to put that axe through. And the iconic "Here's Johnny" line, which he improvised, is a nod to late night American TV, which Stanley Kubrick, being British, didn't really get and almost cut from the feature. But it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, if that film were being made now, that's the equivalent of, I don't know, whoever plays Jack Torrance doing a James Corden carpool karaoke when he puts the axe through. Here's Johnny's definitely better.
Here's Johnny!
My favourite line in this one? I mean, there are lots, but the one about bashing your brains in, yeah, that probably wins.
Wendy, darling, light of my life, I'm not gonna hurt you. You didn't let me finish my sentence. I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains in.
Finally, I've not mentioned Easter eggs yet. There aren't really any, apart from Danny Lloyd getting a brief cameo as a grown-up in 2019's Doctor Sleep, which was a nice nod to this. But instead, I'm going to wrap up by saying this is a magnificent piece of horror cinema. It's wonderful. Go and watch it.
Great party, isn't it?
So there are 19 reasons to watch The Shining. Do let me know what you think. I'm conscious I've barely scratched the surface. There was so much mythology and lore and just content around this film that just doing 19 reasons in a 10-minute video here is never going to cover everything. But let me know what you think of the movie and of my reasons, and let me know anything that you would add as a reason to watch The Shining. A couple of things to plug before we go. You might want to check out my video 19 Reasons to Read The Shining, which I did a couple of years ago. You can come and say hi on Instagram, where I'm at Dave Musson. You can sign up for the newsletter to get the mini collection and get the nice emails with the indie horror authors. You can check out more indie horror authors by checking out the Constant Writers podcast. Either find it here on my YouTube page or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, test yourself on The Shining, on Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, or on the novel with the Ultimate Stephen King quiz book, which I published last year. Spent 2 years of my life writing. It's 3,000 plus questions on all things Stephen King, and I think you'll have a good time with it. And if you've already bought a copy, thank you. You could leave a rating and review on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads. That would be super duper 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 help. Next up, we've got this month's book special. So join me for that. And stay warm.